The mysterious mission begins. Jackson had always dreamed of exploring the stars, but today, his mission was unlike any he had ever been given before. He stood in the center of the human command ship, staring out of the window at the dark void of space. The vastness of it all was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. He was about to travel to a far-off planet, a place where no human had set foot before, a planet named Viora. Viora was known for its breathtaking beauty and dangerous mysteries. It was a place that even the bravest explorers avoided. The planet's surface was covered in thick forests, glowing rivers, and towering mountain ranges. But beneath its beauty lay hidden dangers, creatures unlike anything seen on Earth, and a strange, ancient power that had driven away all previous missions. No one had ever returned from Viora, until now. Jackson had been selected for this mission because of his reputation as a skilled explorer. He wasn't afraid of the unknown, and he knew how to survive in the harshest environments. But even he felt a flutter of uncertainty in his chest as the ship's countdown began. He checked his gear one last time. A blaster, a survival pack, and a translator device to communicate with any alien species he might encounter. The most important item of all, however, was a small data chip tucked safely into his jacket. This chip held the coordinates of the rarest flower in the galaxy, a flower known only as the Heart of Viora. The Heart of Viora was said to have healing properties so powerful that it could cure any illness. It could even bring someone back from the brink of death. For centuries, this flower had been a legend. No one had ever found it. Yet here Jackson was, entrusted with the mission to retrieve it. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. As the countdown reached 0, the ship's engines roared to life. Jackson's heart raced in his chest as the craft blasted off into the depths of space. The trip would take several days, but he didn't mind. He had prepared for this moment for years, and nothing could stop him now. During the journey, Jackson sat in the quiet of his small cabin, staring at the starry sky outside. He couldn't help but think about the people who had failed before him. He wondered what had gone wrong. Why had they not returned? What dangers lurked on the surface of Viora that made it so deadly? He pushed these thoughts aside. Fear wouldn't help him. His focus had to remain on the task at hand. Hours turned into days as Jackson's ship traveled through the dark void. And finally, Viora's shadow appeared on the horizon. It was a strange sight, a planet so beautiful, yet so eerie. Its surface glowed with an unnatural light, and strange shapes could be seen shifting beneath the clouds. Jackson felt a chill run down his spine as he prepared to land. The coordinates for the flower were located in a remote area of the planet, far from any known settlements. He had been briefed on the dangers he might face, but there was one thing no one could prepare him for: the feeling of isolation. As the ship descended toward the surface, the thick atmosphere of Viora made the descent bumpy. Jackson gripped the armrests of his seat, his mind racing. What if something went wrong? What if he got lost? The feeling of isolation only grew stronger as the planet's vast, untamed wilderness stretched out below him. But he couldn't turn back. He had a mission to complete, and he was determined to succeed. The ship finally touched down on the surface with a heavy thud. Jackson quickly grabbed his gear, making sure everything was in place. His heart pounded as he stepped out of the ship and onto the alien soil. The air smelled different here, earthy, yet tinged with a strange sweetness that seemed to come from the planet itself. The ground was soft, almost spongy, and the sky above him was a swirl of strange colors. It was beautiful, but at the same time, it felt foreign. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't his home. Jackson looked around, taking in the landscape. Tall, alien trees with glowing leaves reached up to the sky, their branches twisting in impossible angles. Strange, glowing creatures flitted between the trees, their forms barely visible in the dim light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He took a deep breath and set off in the direction indicated by his data chip. The path ahead of him seemed clear, but he knew better than to trust appearances. Viora had a way of changing. What seemed safe one moment could become deadly the next. As he walked deeper into the wilderness, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He kept his hand near his blaster, just in case. The planet had a reputation for being unpredictable. Anything could happen here, and he needed to be ready. After hours of trekking through the thick forest, Jackson finally reached the area marked on his map. It was a clearing, surrounded by tall, shimmering plants. In the center of the clearing stood a single flower, the heart of Viora. Its petals glowed with an ethereal light, casting a soft, warm glow across the clearing. It was even more beautiful than he had imagined. But as he took a step forward, something unexpected happened. The air around him seemed to shift, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. Jackson's heart skipped a beat as he realized that he wasn't alone. Something was out there. Something far more dangerous than he had prepared for. The real mission was about to begin. Dangerous journey through Viora. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as he ventured deeper into the wild, untamed wilderness of Viora. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant sounds of unknown creatures echoed through the trees. Every step felt uncertain, as if the planet itself was alive and watching him. The dense forest stretched out in every direction, and he had no clear path to follow except for the vague coordinates on his map. He couldn't afford to get lost, but something inside told him that Viora had a way of making explorers feel small, insignificant, and vulnerable. The trees around him were unlike anything he had seen before. Their trunks were enormous, with thick vines wrapping around them like giant snakes. The leaves on the trees shimmered in the dim light, glowing with an otherworldly radiance. Strange creatures flitted through the branches, their forms barely visible in the shadows. He couldn't tell if they were friendly or hostile, but he knew better than to approach them. The legends told of creatures that could paralyze a person with a single glance. As he moved forward, the ground beneath him became increasingly treacherous. The soil was soft, almost spongy, and he had to tread carefully to avoid sinking into the muck. Strange, bioluminescent fungi grew on the ground, casting an eerie light that made the forest feel even more otherworldly. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It was a sensation he had never felt before, even in the most hostile environments on Earth. He kept his blaster close, his hand hovering over it, ready to defend himself at a moment's notice. The closer he got to the coordinates, the more the air seemed to change. It wasn't just the humidity or the temperature, it was as if the planet itself was reacting to his presence. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension in the air that made his skin crawl. As he walked, Jackson noticed that the forest began to grow quieter. The usual hum of the alien wildlife had died down, and the only sound was the rustle of the leaves above. It felt as though the entire planet was holding its breath, waiting for something. He stopped in his tracks, his instincts telling him something was wrong. His eyes darted around, scanning the trees and the shadows for any movement. Everything was still, too still. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. Before he could react, a low growl pierced the silence. It was coming from behind him. Jackson spun around, raising his blaster, but saw nothing. His heart raced as the growl grew louder, closer. Something large was approaching. Suddenly, a massive shape burst from the undergrowth. It was a creature unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. Its body was covered in dark, scaly armor, and its eyes glowed with a bright, menacing light. It was a predator, fast, powerful, and deadly. Jackson barely had time to react as the creature lunged toward him with a terrifying speed. Instinctively, Jackson fired his blaster, but the shot missed. The creature swiped at him with its claws, narrowly missing his arm. He rolled to the side, his heart hammering in his chest. The creature let out a roar of frustration and turned to face him again. It was relentless, its massive jaws snapping open and closed as it closed in on him. Jackson had to think fast. He was out of his element here. The creature was too fast, too strong, and he wasn't equipped for a fight like this. He sprinted toward a nearby tree, hoping to use it for cover. As he reached the base of the tree, he glanced over his shoulder and saw the creature gaining on him. There was no time to waste. In a desperate move, Jackson activated the smoke grenades he had in his pack. A thick cloud of smoke erupted, filling the air with a haze that obscured his vision. The creature growled in frustration as it lunged forward. But Jackson was already moving, slipping through the smoke and darting toward another patch of trees. The smoke gave him a moment to think. He couldn't outrun the creature, but maybe he could outsmart it. The creature's senses were sharp, but it didn't seem to have the ability to track him through the smoke. He had to keep moving, keep the creature off his trail. Jackson heard the creature thrashing through the trees, growling in frustration as it tried to locate him. He stayed low, moving silently through the underbrush. His breath was heavy, his body tense with adrenaline. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to stop, but he couldn't. Not until he was safe. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, the growling began to fade, and Jackson allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. He had lost the creature, at least for now, but he knew this wasn't over. Viora was a planet of constant danger. One threat had passed, but he had no doubt that there would be more to come. Jackson paused to gather his bearings. He had to keep moving. The flower was still out there, waiting to be found, but now, more than ever, he knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be more creatures, more challenges, and more dangers waiting for him in the depths of this alien world. But he was determined. He would find the heart of Viora. He had no choice. As he pressed forward, the forest seemed to close in around him. The shadows grew longer, and the air grew heavier. The tension in the atmosphere was palpable, and Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something even worse than the creature he had just escaped was waiting for him further ahead. But he was no quitter. He had come too far to turn back now. Every step brought him closer to the heart of Viora, and to whatever lay ahead in the dark heart of this dangerous, mysterious planet. The encounter with the alien girl. Jackson's journey through the forest seemed endless. Every step deeper into Viora felt like he was falling into another world, a world where time and space didn't follow the rules he understood. The air was thick, heavier with each passing hour, and the strange whispers of the planet filled the stillness around him. As he trudged through the dense underbrush, Jackson couldn't help but feel the weight of his mission pressing down on him. He needed to find the heart of Viora, but there was no telling what he would face next. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rustling sound ahead. The undergrowth shifted, and Jackson's body tensed. He instinctively reached for his blaster, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Was it another creature? Another threat lurking in the shadows, ready to attack? Then, out of the dense forest, a figure emerged. At first, Jackson thought it was another alien beast, its body cloaked in shadows and vines. But as the figure stepped forward into the dim light, he saw that it was a young woman. An alien woman. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, and her hair flowed like liquid silver, shimmering as though it were made of starlight. Her eyes, glowing faintly, held an intensity that seemed to pierce through him, as if she could see right into his soul. She moved silently, her footsteps barely making a sound as she approached. There was something ethereal about her, almost otherworldly. She didn't look like the terrifying creatures that roamed the planet, but there was no mistaking the danger that radiated from her presence. She was an enigma, and Jackson couldn't quite decide if she was a friend or foe. Jackson's grip on his blaster tightened, but he didn't raise it. Instead, he took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. She didn't speak, but she watched him with an intensity that was unsettling. Her presence felt like a challenge, as if she were daring him to make a move. The alien woman finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but it carried a weight of authority. "You are far from where you belong, human," she said. Her accent was foreign, But the translator device on Jackson's wrist immediately picked up the meaning of her words. "What brings you to Viora?" Jackson was cautious, not sure if he could trust her. "I'm here for the heart of Viora," he said, his voice steady. He kept his hand near his blaster, just in case. "I've come to retrieve it. I need it." The alien girl studied him for a long moment, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. She tilted her head, almost as if trying to understand him. "The heart of Viora is not something you can simply take, human," she replied, her voice low and serious. "Many have come before you, and all have failed. The flower you seek is not just a flower. It is a key to something much greater than you can imagine." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He had heard stories about the power of the heart of Viora, but he hadn't fully understood what he was dealing with. The legend spoke of its healing abilities, its ability to save lives, but he had no idea that it held such immense significance. "What do you mean?" he asked, his curiosity getting the best of him. The alien woman's expression softened slightly. "It is said that only one with pure intentions can claim the heart of Viora," she explained. "But there are others who would use it for darker purposes. I can guide you, if you wish. But know this, your journey is fraught with danger. Viora is not kind to those who are not worthy." Jackson felt a surge of determination rise within him. He wasn't here for power or glory. He was here to save lives. He had no choice but to trust her. "I'll take the risk," he said, his voice firm. "I need to find the flower. It's the only way to help my people." The alien girl regarded him for a moment longer, as if weighing his words. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, she stepped aside. "Very well. I will guide you. But know that there is much you do not understand about this world. You must be prepared for what lies ahead. The path to the heart is not just physical. It will test your very soul." Jackson hesitated. Something about her words sent a shiver down his spine, but he knew he had no choice. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. "I'm ready." The alien woman turned, leading him through the dense forest. Her movements were graceful, fluid, as if she belonged here, in this strange, alien world. Jackson followed closely behind, doing his best to keep up. Despite the unease that gnawed at him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was the first time he had ever encountered an alien, and there was something captivating about her, something that made him want to know more. As they walked, she spoke little, but the few words she did say only deepened the mystery surrounding her. "Viora is alive," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "It chooses who is worthy and who is not. Those who come seeking power are rejected. Only those who seek to heal, to restore balance, can succeed." Jackson didn't fully understand her words, but he was willing to trust her. She seemed to know more about this planet than anyone else. Her connection to Viora was undeniable, and that made her the perfect guide. But he still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling him. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more Jackson felt the weight of the planet's strange, ancient energy pressing down on him. It was as though the very land itself was watching them, judging their every move. Every tree, every creature, seemed to hold a secret, a piece of the puzzle that was Viora. They reached a clearing after what felt like hours of walking. In the center of the clearing, bathed in an ethereal glow, stood a stone altar. Atop it lay the heart of Viora, its petals glowing with a soft, golden light. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. This was it. But as his eyes locked onto the flower, he sensed something shift in the air. The alien girl had stopped beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of caution and sadness. "Be careful," she whispered. "You are not the only one who seeks the heart." Jackson turned to her, his heart racing. Something told him that their journey was about to take a dangerous turn. The quest for the flower. Jackson's eyes remained fixed on the heart of Viora, its ethereal glow pulsing like a heartbeat. The flower was more beautiful than he had ever imagined, its golden petals shimmering softly in the strange light of the clearing. It was as though the entire forest had come alive around it, all the creatures and plants surrounding the flower paying silent tribute to its power. But despite the beauty, something felt off. The air was thick with an invisible tension, and the stillness of the forest seemed to deepen with every passing second. The alien girl, who had introduced herself as Lyra, stood beside him. Her glowing eyes watched the flower with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between sorrow and apprehension. She had told him that many had come before him, seeking the flower for their own reasons, but all had failed. She had also mentioned that the flower was a key to something much greater than anyone understood, something tied deeply to the fate of both her people and humanity. "Is this the heart of Viora?" Jackson asked, his voice barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might disturb the delicate balance of the clearing. Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes. But remember, it is not just a flower. It is an ancient guardian, one that has chosen to protect this world's most sacred secrets. To approach it requires more than just strength or bravery. It requires something deeper, something that cannot be faked." Jackson glanced at her, puzzled. "What do you mean? What does it want from me?" "The heart of Viora does not accept the unworthy," Lyra explained. "It tests those who seek it. It will probe your intentions, your fears, your desires. Only the pure of heart can take it without facing the consequences." Jackson's brow furrowed. He wasn't sure what she meant by consequences, but he was beginning to understand that this was no ordinary quest. The flower seemed to hold a kind of ancient power, one that could change the fate of worlds, but only if approached with the right spirit. He had come to Viora to help save his people, to retrieve the flower and use its healing powers to cure a deadly disease that had spread across Earth. But as Lyra spoke, Jackson began to question whether his mission was truly as straightforward as he had thought. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "You must understand that Viora is not just a place. It is a living, breathing entity. It senses the truth within you. If your heart is clouded with greed, selfishness, or anger, the flower will not grant you its power. It will turn on you, just as it has done to so many before." Jackson didn't want to believe it. He had come here with good intentions, or at least he believed he had. His mission was to save lives, to bring hope to a dying world. How could that be wrong? But as he looked at Lyra, he saw the solemnity in her eyes and realized that this planet, and the heart of Viora, demanded more than just good intentions. It demanded truth, purity, and perhaps even sacrifice. "Then, what should I do?" Jackson asked, the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I came here to save my people. I don't have any other choice." Lyra remained silent for a long moment, her gaze never leaving the glowing flower. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves and creating soft, melodic sounds that filled the clearing. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath. "You must decide what you truly seek," Lyra finally said. "Is it the power to save your people, or is it the willingness to change, to risk everything for a cause greater than yourself? The flower will reveal your true self." Jackson stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the weight of her words sink in. The heart of Viora wasn't just a cure. It was a test of everything he believed in, everything he was. He couldn't deny the urgency of his mission, but he also knew that if he approached the flower with selfishness or fear, it might turn its power against him, just as it had done with others before. Taking a deep breath, Jackson stepped forward, his eyes still locked on the flower. He could feel the heat from its glow, like a distant sun warming his skin. His fingers twitched, and for a brief moment, he considered reaching out to touch it. But something stopped him. He knew that if he were to take that step, it would be more than just picking a flower. It would be a choice that would shape the rest of his life. "Jackson, wait," Lyra's voice rang out, stopping him in his tracks. He turned to her, confusion written on his face. "What is it? We don't have time for hesitation." Lyra's expression softened. "You don't understand yet. This flower is not just about healing your people. It's about understanding the balance between your world and Viora's. The heart of Viora is connected to the very soul of this planet. If you take it without understanding that balance, you risk destroying everything you've come to save. Jackson's eyes widened as her words sank in. He had thought he was only helping his people, but now it seemed there was more at stake than just Earth. The fate of Viora itself was tied to the flower. To take it without considering the consequences could lead to disastrous outcomes, not just for his planet, but for the entire galaxy. I don't know if I can do this, Jackson admitted, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. I don't know if I can save them without risking everything. Lyra stepped closer, her gaze steady. You don't have to do this alone. I will help you, but you must promise me one thing. Promise me that you will listen to Viora, that you will respect the balance. Only then can you take what you came for without consequences. Jackson looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the deep pain in them. This wasn't just about the flower. It was about something much greater, something that tied him to this alien world and its people. He had come here seeking a cure, but he was beginning to realize that what he sought was far more complex than he had ever imagined. I promise, he said quietly, knowing that the journey ahead would be more difficult than anything he had faced before. But he also knew that he couldn't turn back now. He had already come too far. With that, Jackson stepped forward, his hand hovering above the heart of Viora. This was the moment that would define everything, the choice that could save his people or cost him everything. He took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the planet surrounding him, and gently reached out, his fingers brushing against the soft petals. As his hand made contact, the entire clearing seemed to shudder. The air crackled with power, and Jackson felt a surge of energy rush through him, filling him with a sense of clarity and purpose. But it was not just his own feelings that filled the air. It was the ancient power of Viora itself, and it was speaking to him. The flower responded, and the test had begun. The unbelievable discovery. Jackson's heart raced as his fingers made contact with the heart of Viora. The moment his hand brushed against the glowing petals, a sudden surge of energy coursed through him, so powerful and intense that it nearly knocked him off his feet. The world around him seemed to pulse with life, the air thick with an ancient force that he couldn't fully comprehend. His body hummed, his mind overwhelmed with vivid images of distant stars, alien landscapes, and echoes of voices long forgotten. It was as if he were being pulled into the very soul of Viora itself. For a moment, everything seemed to fade into the background. The clearing, Lyra, the planet, everything disappeared. Jackson was no longer standing in the forest. He was floating, suspended in an endless void of swirling energy. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. It felt as though time had stopped, as though he had transcended the limitations of his physical form. Then a voice rang out, clear and powerful, reverberating through his very being. Who dares to take what is not theirs? The voice echoed through Jackson's mind, an ancient presence that seemed to be everywhere at once. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The voice continued, its tone stern, but there was a sense of calm beneath the authority. You seek to take the heart of Viora, human. But tell me, do you understand the true cost? Jackson struggled to find his voice, his throat dry and constricted. He had never felt so small, so insignificant. But he gathered his courage and spoke, his words shaky but determined. I seek it to save my people. A disease is ravaging my world. The heart of Viora is said to have the power to heal, to bring life back from the brink of death. I don't have a choice. I must take it. The voice fell silent for a moment, as though considering his words. Then it spoke again, softer this time, though the weight of its words was no less heavy. It is not the heart of Viora that will heal your people, human. It is the truth you carry within you, the strength of your spirit. The heart is but a vessel. It is a reflection of the intentions of those who seek it. If you take it with selfish intent, you will doom your world. Jackson felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had always believed his intentions were pure. After all, he was trying to save lives. But something about the voice's words struck deep within him, as if they were peeling away the layers of his beliefs, revealing something he hadn't fully understood. He was not simply seeking a cure for a disease. He was seeking to alter the course of life and death itself. The void around him began to shift, and the images in his mind became clearer. He saw flashes of his home. Earth, ravaged by illness, its cities filled with fear and suffering. He saw his people, desperate and struggling for survival. He saw the faces of loved ones, people he had lost to the disease, and the realization hit him like a thunderclap. He wasn't just saving lives, he was saving hope. His mission wasn't just about finding the flower. It was about preserving everything that made humanity worth fighting for. Jackson's knees trembled as the weight of this realization settled over him. But there was no turning back. He had already come so far. You carry the burden of your people's survival on your shoulders. But be warned, human. The heart does not come without consequence. Jackson tried to steady his breathing. What do you mean by consequence? His voice was hoarse, but he refused to back down. I'm not afraid of the cost. I'll do whatever it takes. The voice seemed to pause, as if considering his resolve. Then a ripple of light filled the void, and Jackson's vision shifted once again. This time, he found himself standing in the middle of a vast, ancient city, an alien civilization long past its prime. The streets were empty, the buildings crumbled and broken, and the once glorious sky now looked dim, as though the light of the stars had been drained from the universe. This was once my home, the voice said, a note of sorrow in its tone. We were a great civilization, the keepers of knowledge, the stewards of balance. We sought to harness the power of the heart, believing we could control it, shape it to our will. But we were wrong. We took too much, and the cost was our world. The heart did not heal us. It exposed our weaknesses, our greed, and our desire to control that which was beyond us. Jackson felt his chest tighten. He could see the remnants of the alien civilization, their destruction, right before him. It was a cautionary tale, one that seemed to mirror his own world's struggles. His people were fighting to survive, but what if their survival came at a cost too great to bear? I did not heed the warning. The voice continued, its tone heavy with regret. And now my people are gone. The heart of Viora is not meant to be controlled. It is a force of nature, a living entity that must remain in balance. If you take it for your own desires, the very fabric of your world will unravel. Jackson felt a pang of fear deep in his gut. The power to heal, to save his people, was it really worth the potential destruction that might follow? Could he live with the consequences if it cost his world its future? But before he could ask, the scene around him changed once again. This time, he found himself standing in the clearing, the heart of Viora glowing before him, its golden light more radiant than ever. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes wide with concern. You must make your choice, Jackson. The voice faded, leaving behind an eerie silence. The choice was his. He could take the flower and risk everything for his people, or he could leave it behind and find another way to save them. But one thing was clear. Whatever he decided, the consequences would be felt by more than just Earth. As Jackson reached for the heart once more, his mind was clearer than ever before. The true power of Viora wasn't in the flower. It was in the choices that were made in its presence. He wasn't just fighting for his people's survival. He was fighting for their future, for the balance that could either save or destroy everything they had. With trembling hands, Jackson touched the petals again, knowing that this decision would change everything. The moment he did, the heart of Viora responded. Its glow brightened, its energy overwhelming, and the entire planet seemed to shake as if the very ground was alive, aware of the decision he had just made. The journey was far from over. But now, more than ever, Jackson knew that his actions would decide the fate of not just his world, but Viora's as well. The shocking truth, the moment Jackson's fingers touched the heart of Viora again, The world around him seemed to shift. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and the air crackled with an energy so intense that it felt like the planet itself was responding to his touch. It was as if Viora's very soul had awakened, reacting to the choice he had made. The golden light of the flower intensified, its glow now blinding. Jackson shielded his eyes, feeling the power surging through him, flooding his senses. Then, a voice broke through the overwhelming noise, calm yet commanding. "You have made your choice, human." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. It was the same voice, the ancient presence that had spoken to him earlier. But this time, it was different. There was no ambiguity, no sense of warning in its tone. This time, it felt final. "What is happening?" Jackson whispered, his voice trembling as the earth beneath him seemed to shift, as if reacting to the force of his decision. "You sought the heart of Viora, believing it to be the key to saving your people," the voice continued. "But the heart is no mere object. It is the essence of this world, the living force that is tied to every being on this planet, from the smallest insect to the largest creature. It is a reflection of the balance that sustains Viora's existence." Jackson felt a cold chill spread through him. His hands tightened around the flower, but the more he tried to hold on, the more the energy around him began to pulse violently, almost as if the heart itself was rejecting him. "The heart was never meant to be taken," the voice said softly, almost mournfully. "It was created to preserve the balance of Viora's ecosystem, to maintain the harmony between the creatures and the land. To take it is to disturb that balance, to rip away the very thing that holds this planet together. In doing so, you risk everything, your people, your world, and mine." Jackson stumbled backward, his mind spinning as the truth of what he had done began to settle in. He had come to Viora with a singular goal, to save his people. But now, as the full weight of the voice's words hit him, he realized how little he truly understood. He had been so focused on his mission that he hadn't considered the broader consequences of his actions. The heart wasn't just a cure. It was a living, breathing part of the planet, a force that couldn't simply be controlled or extracted without grave repercussions. He glanced at Lyra, who stood beside him, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and sorrow. She had warned him, but he hadn't listened. He had been so sure that the heart could be the answer, that he could use it to save Earth. But now, with the ground beneath him quaking and the air thick with unnatural energy, he saw the price of his ignorance. Lyra stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't understand, did you? The heart of Viora is not a tool. It is a guardian of life, a protector of this world's delicate balance. By taking it, you've disturbed that balance. The consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." Jackson's breath caught in his throat. He had thought that by taking the heart, he would be bringing hope to his world. But now, he saw that the cost was not just the destruction of Viora. It could mean the end of everything he had come to fight for. "You need to return it," Lyra continued, her voice filled with urgency. "You cannot take what is not yours. The longer you hold it, the more damage you cause." Jackson's heart raced as he turned back to the heart of Viora, which still pulsed with that blinding light. He could feel the pressure building within the planet itself, a sense of urgency in the very air. He had to make a decision, but for the first time since he arrived on Viora, he felt utterly lost. He didn't know what to do. He had come here with one purpose, and now it seemed that purpose was unraveling in front of him. But as his mind raced, something strange happened. The ground beneath him shook again, this time more violently. The plants around him began to writhe, their tendrils stretching toward the heart as if trying to reclaim it. The wind picked up, howling through the clearing, and a low rumble echoed from the depths of the planet. It was as though Viora itself was awakening, responding to the imbalance that had been caused by his actions. Jackson's pulse quickened. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. Viora wasn't just alive in a metaphysical sense. The entire planet was a living organism, one that would fight back against anything that threatened its survival. By disturbing the heart, He had triggered a planetary defense mechanism. The plants around him seemed to come alive, their once still forms now twisting and moving like sentient beings. They were growing rapidly, wrapping themselves around the heart, pushing against it, as if trying to drag it back into the earth. The clearing was no longer a peaceful sanctuary. It had become a battleground between the living forces of Viora and the invader that Jackson had become. Lyra grabbed Jackson's arm, pulling him away from the flower. "You have to listen to me," she said, her voice frantic. "If you don't return the heart now, the entire planet will fight to protect itself, and we will both be caught in the destruction." Jackson's mind raced. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it fast. The energy in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as if Viora was preparing to unleash its full fury. The ground continued to quake, and the trees began to bend and sway unnaturally, their branches snapping as the planet responded to the disturbance. With no other option, Jackson reached out and placed the heart back on the altar where it had once rested. As soon as his fingers left the petals, the energy in the air seemed to settle. The ground stopped shaking, and the wind died down. The plants retreated, their twisting tendrils slowly releasing their grip on the heart. The golden glow of the flower faded to a soft, calming light. For a moment, everything was still. Then the voice spoke once more, but this time, it was filled with a sense of relief. "You have chosen wisely, human." Jackson stood frozen, his hands trembling, his body drenched in sweat. He had nearly caused the destruction of Viora, and perhaps even Earth, by not understanding the true nature of what he sought. But in that final moment, he had made the right choice. He had restored the balance. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. The heart is not meant to be taken. It must be protected, preserved. Only then will it continue to heal. Jackson nodded silently, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. He had come to Viora with the hope of saving his people, but in the end, he had learned that some things were beyond his control. The heart of Viora was not a cure. It was a protector, a guardian of balance, and in returning it to its rightful place, he had ensured that the planet would continue to heal itself in its own way. But as he stood there, watching the heart glow softly in the clearing, Jackson knew that this wasn't the end. His journey had only just begun, and the future of both Viora and Earth would depend on what he did next. The unbelievable reaction. The heart of Viora, now safely returned to its resting place, glowed with a soft golden light that seemed to calm the entire clearing. The tension in the air began to dissipate, and the tremors that had rocked the land slowly faded. Jackson stood there, still overwhelmed by the series of events that had just unfolded. His chest tightened as he tried to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. He had come to Viora with a singular purpose, to save his people, but he had learned that the path to salvation was far more complicated than he could have imagined. And yet, standing before the heart, he felt a strange sense of peace that he hadn't felt since he first set foot on this alien planet. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes scanning the now calmed clearing. She had been the one to guide him here, to help him understand the delicate balance between their worlds, and it seemed that despite everything, she too was processing the weight of what had just transpired. "You've done it," Lyra said quietly, her voice almost reverent. "The heart is at peace. Viora is at peace." Jackson looked at her, his voice thick with a mixture of relief and regret. "But at what cost?" he murmured. "I almost destroyed everything." Lyra shook her head slowly. "No, you didn't destroy anything. You learned, and you chose wisely. Not many would have made the same choice, but you listened to Viora. And that is why the planet has allowed you to leave, without consequence." Jackson let out a long, shuddering breath. He had been on the verge of making a choice that could have been disastrous, but something inside him had finally understood the true power of the heart. It wasn't a weapon to be wielded or a cure to be used. It was a living, breathing force that could only exist in harmony with the world it protected. As they stood there in the stillness, Jackson turned his gaze to the horizon. The sky above was slowly changing color, the first rays of dawn beginning to break through the clouds. The golden light of the heart seemed to ripple out across the land, touching every tree, every blade of grass, as though the flower was extending its life force to every corner of Viora. A sudden thought struck him. What now? What happens to me? And to Earth, after all of this? Lyra's gaze softened. You have learned the most important lesson. Human balance. The heart of Viora is not something that can be controlled, but it can be a guide. If you return to your world with this understanding, perhaps you can find another way to save your people without disturbing the balance that sustains them. Jackson felt a stirring in his chest, a glimmer of hope rising within him. He had arrived on Viora seeking a quick fix, a solution that could save his people in the simplest of ways. But now he understood that there were no easy answers. True healing came not from force or manipulation, but from respect, balance, and understanding. Earth might still be in crisis, but he now knew that he couldn't solve his people's problems by disrupting the very fabric of life itself. He turned back to Lyra, his eyes clearer than they had ever been. I understand now. I thought the heart was the solution, but it's more than that. It's a lesson in respecting the world around us, understanding what we truly need, and not just taking what we want. Lyra nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Exactly. And in that understanding, you have already taken the first step towards saving your people. It's not the heart that will heal your world. It is the wisdom you carry now. You must share it. Teach your people the value of balance, of respecting the natural world. Jackson's mind began to race as the enormity of what she was saying began to settle in. He had come to Viora seeking a cure, a shortcut to solving his world's greatest crisis. But what he had learned here was far more valuable. He had learned that true healing wasn't about a quick fix or a magical solution. It was about changing the way humanity approached the world, its resources, and its survival. It was about learning to live in harmony with the planet, rather than exploiting it. For the first time, Jackson felt that he had the clarity he needed to make a real difference back on Earth. The solution wasn't as simple as taking the heart. It was about shifting the mindset of humanity, helping them realize that they could not continue to take from the world without giving something back. They needed to heal, to work together, and to find a way to restore balance, not just for their own survival, but for the survival of the planet itself. But as he thought about returning to Earth with this knowledge, he knew that there would be challenges ahead. He would have to face those who would resist change, those who were still seeking quick, unsustainable solutions. And yet, he also knew that there were others who would listen, who would recognize the importance of preserving the balance between humanity and nature. He would need to find those allies and work with them to spread this message. Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts. You must go now. Viora has allowed you to leave in peace, but only if you carry this lesson with you. The heart is no longer something to be taken. It is something to be protected. The planet will always remember your actions here, Jackson. Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He knew that his time on Viora was coming to an end, but the journey he had begun was far from over. It was time to return to Earth, not with a cure, but with a message of balance, respect, and healing. As they made their way back toward the ship, Jackson felt a strange sense of closure. He had come to Viora as a man on a mission, desperate to find a solution for his people, but he was leaving as something more, someone who had learned the true meaning of balance, and who now understood that sometimes the greatest gift we can give the world is the wisdom to live in harmony with it. When Jackson finally boarded his ship and prepared to leave the surface of Viora, he cast one last look at the planet. The golden light of the heart still shimmered in the distance, a symbol of the planet's enduring life force. As the ship lifted off into the sky, Jackson knew that he had not just witnessed something extraordinary, he had become a part of something much greater than himself. The path ahead would be difficult, but now, armed with the knowledge and wisdom of Viora, Jackson felt ready to face the future. He would return to Earth, not with a cure, but with the power of understanding. And with it, the hope of a world that could learn to live in balance once more.